The skillet crashed against the wall 3 inches from Corbin Ashfield's head, sending bacon grease splattering across his dusty coat. He ducked instinctively, his hand moving toward the Colt at his hip before his brain caught up with his reflexes. "Get out!" The redhead, wielding a wooden spoon like a weapon, had fire in her green eyes that matched the flames dancing in the cast-iron stove behind her. "This is our kitchen." Corbin straightened slowly, his weathered hands raised in surrender. At 32, he'd faced down claim jumpers, cattle rustlers, and Apache war parties. But 3 furious women in calico dresses defending a kitchen was uncharted territory. "Ma'am, I believe there's been some confusion." He pulled the crumpled deed from his vest pocket, the official seal of Willowbrook County still visible despite the document's rough journey in his saddlebags. "I bought this house fair and square from Judge Pemberton yesterday. $1, cash money." The blonde at the kitchen table looked up from kneading bread dough, flour dusting her delicate hands. $1? Her voice carried a musical lilt. That made Corbin's chest tighten unexpectedly. "That old buzzard sold our home for $1? Your home?" Corbin's confusion deepened as he took in the domestic scene before him. Fresh bread cooling on windowsills, vegetables from what must be a well-tended garden chopped and ready for soup, and the lingering scent of cinnamon and honey that spoke of a house truly lived in. The third woman, dark-haired and quiet until now, set down her embroidery hoop with deliberate precision. "I'm Celestine Moreau," she said, her accent carrying hints of New Orleans. "This is Raven O'Brien," she gestured toward the redhead still brandishing her spoon, "and Delphine Hartwell. We've been caring for this house for 3 years, ever since old Mrs. Whitmore passed." "Caring for it how?" Corbin asked, though he was beginning to suspect the answer wouldn't be simple. Raven snorted. "By living in it, working the garden, keeping the roof patched and the walls painted." "What did you think, that we were ghosts?" "The judge said it was abandoned." Corbin studied the deed again, looking for some clue he'd missed. "Said the previous owner died with no heirs, and the county needed to clear the books." Delphine's hands stilled in the bread dough. "Mrs. Whitmore was like a grandmother to all of us. When she fell ill, we moved in to care for her. After she passed, we just stayed. No one ever told us to leave." "Until now," Celestine added, her dark eyes measuring Corbin with an intensity that made him shift his weight from one boot to the other. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the distant lowing of cattle. In the valley below, Corbin had ridden into Willowbrook that morning expecting to claim his house, maybe hire some help to get his ranch operation started. He'd saved every penny from 5 years of trail driving and cattle trading for this moment, his chance at something permanent, something that couldn't be stolen or burned or washed away in a flash flood. He hadn't expected to find 3 women, who clearly considered this place their sanctuary. "Well," he said finally, settling his hat more firmly on his head, "I reckon we've got ourselves a problem." Raven O'Brien slammed the coffee pot onto the stove with enough force to rattle the windows. "A problem? Mister, you are the problem." Corbin winced, not from her words but from the way Delphine's face crumpled before she turned away to hide her tears. In the week since he discovered his abandoned house came with 3 determined residents. He'd learned that the blonde was gentle as spring rain and just as necessary to keep things growing around here. "Now hold on," he said, unconsciously gentling his voice the way he did with spooked horses. "I never said anyone had to leave today." Celestine looked up from the letter she was penning at the kitchen table, her fountain pen poised like a weapon. "How generous of you to grant us time in our own home." The situation was impossible. Corbin had checked every legal avenue in town, even rode 20 miles to the county seat to examine the records himself. The house was legally his, bought fair and square when the county auctioned off properties for unpaid taxes. But these 3 Women had clearly made it a home in ways that went deeper than any deed. "I've been thinking," he said, accepting the cup of coffee Delphine wordlessly offered him. Even angry, she couldn't help taking care of people. "Maybe we can work out some kind of arrangement." "What sort of arrangement?" Raven's green eyes narrowed with suspicion. Corbin had spent 3 sleepless nights in his bedroll by the creek, staring up at the stars and trying to solve this puzzle. The women needed a home. He needed workers for his ranch, someone to tend the garden that fed everyone, someone to mend clothes and blankets, someone to cook meals that didn't taste like leather and regret. "I need help getting this place running as a proper ranch," he said carefully. "Cattle don't tend themselves, and a man can't do everything alone. You ladies seem to know how to make a house into a home." Celestin set down her pen. "You're proposing we work for you?" "I'm proposing we work together." The words came out rougher than he intended, but he pressed on. "This house is big enough for all of us, if we're careful about proprieties. You 3 keep doing what you're already doing, tending the garden, the house, cooking, mending. I'll handle the ranch work, the cattle, repairs. We split the profits fair and square." Delphine's blue eyes widened. "Split the profits?" "Equal 4 ways, Corbin confirmed. "Seems only right, since you'll be doing equal work." Raven crossed her arms. "And what happens when you decide you want a wife? When some proper lady from town catches your fancy?" The question hit harder than it should have. Corbin had been watching these women for a week now, learning their rhythms. Raven's fierce protectiveness that hit a tender heart. Delphine's quiet strength that kept everyone fed and comfortable. Celestin's sharp intelligence as she managed the household accounts with mathematical precision. "I reckon," he said slowly, "that any woman worth marrying would understand that loyalty runs deeper than convenience." Something shifted in the kitchen's atmosphere. Celestin capped her fountain pen with a decisive click. Delphine's tears stopped flowing. Even Raven's militant posture softened slightly. "There would have to be rules," Celestin said finally. "Such as?" "Separate sleeping quarters. No drinking in the house. No bringing strange men around without warning us first." Corbin nodded. "Seems reasonable. I've got some conditions too." "Name them." "No more throwing cookware at my head." "If you've got complaints, we talk them out like civilized people." Despite herself, Raven's mouth twitched toward a smile. "I suppose that's fair. So we're agreed?" Corbin extended his hand toward the center of the kitchen table. One by one, 3 smaller hands joined his dot 2 months into their partnership. Corbin discovered that living with 3 women was like trying to waltz with a tornado, unpredictable, occasionally dangerous, and strangely exhilarating. "The fence in the north pasture is down again," he announced, stomping mud off his boots before entering the kitchen. The morning routine had become sacred. Coffee with Celestin while she reviewed the account books. Breakfast with all 3 women, then dividing up the day's work. Raven looked up from packing his lunch. "Same spot?" "Same spot. Those bulls are determined to court Widow Patterson's dairy cows." "Can you blame them?" Delphine asked with unusual mischief in her voice. "They've been staring at those pretty ladies across the fence for months." Corbin nearly choked on his coffee. Shy Delphine making jokes about courting was like seeing a rainbow in a drought, unexpected and somehow miraculous. "I'll ride over and apologize to Mrs. Patterson again," he said when he recovered. "Maybe bring some of those preserves you made, Delphine." She seemed partial to the peach ones. "Take the strawberry instead," Celestin suggested, not looking up from her ledger. I noticed her eyeing them at Sunday service. This was how it worked now. 3 women who noticed everything, remembered everything, and somehow made his life run smoother than it ever had. In return, he'd expanded the garden, built a new chicken coop, and increased their cattle herd from 12 to 30 head. But it was the small moments that caught him off guard. Like now, watching Raven carefully wrap extra cookies in his lunch pail because she'd learned he gave half his food to old Pete, who lived alone by the river. Or the way Delphine hummed while she worked, filling the house with music. Or how Celestin had started leaving wildflowers in a jar on the kitchen table, claiming they were good for morale. "I might be late tonight," he said, settling his hat. "Want to check the water rights situation down at Miller's Creek. We'll keep your supper warm," Delphine said automatically. "Don't wait up if it gets too late. I can fend for myself." All three women looked at him with identical expressions of polite disbelief. In 2 months, they'd never once let him come home to a cold, empty house. The ride to town gave Corbin time to think, something that had become both blessing and curse lately. The arrangement was working better than he'd dared hope. The ranch was prospering, the women were happy, and he'd never been more content in his life, which was exactly the problem. Somewhere between Raven teaching him to make proper biscuits and Celestin explaining her system for tracking cattle breeding cycles, he'd stopped thinking of them as business partners and started thinking of them as, well, as the three women who made his house feel like home. It was Delphine who worried him most. Not because she was difficult, if anything, she was too easy to care about. Too gentle, too kind, too quick to blush when he complimented her cooking, or thanked her for mending his shirts with tiny, perfect stitches. "You're a fool, Ashfield," he told his horse. "Getting attached to women who'll probably move on once they save enough money." But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. These three had claimed his house, his land, and if he was honest with himself, his heart with the same quiet determination they brought to everything else. The question was whether they'd want to keep any of it permanently. By the time he rode home that evening, golden lamplight was glowing in every window of the house that had been dark and empty just 2 months ago. 3 silhouettes moved behind the kitchen curtains, and he could smell beef stew and fresh bread from 50 yards away. Corbin Ashfield, who'd spent most of his adult life sleeping under stars and eating cold beans from a can, had somehow found himself a family. Now he just had to figure out what to do about it. Corbin found Celestin crying over her correspondence on a Tuesday morning in late September, her dark head bent over an official-looking envelope. Tears dropped onto the expensive paper, and she made no effort to wipe them away. "What's wrong?" He set his coffee cup down harder than necessary, the sound sharp in the quiet kitchen. She looked up with red-rimmed eyes. "My brother has found me." The words hit Corbin like a physical blow. In 4 months of partnership, none of the women had talked much about their pasts, and he'd respected their privacy. But he'd pieced together enough to know that Celestin's educated accent and refined manners suggested a different life before Willowbrook. "Found you?" he repeated carefully. "Lucien never approved of my independence." Her laugh held no humor. "He's been looking for me since I left New Orleans 3 years ago. Apparently, someone saw me at the county fair and recognized me." Raven emerged from the pantry, took one look at Celestin's face, and immediately sat down beside her. "What does he want?" "He wants me to come home and marry the man he's chosen for me. A business partner of his, older, wealthy, with political connections." Celestin's hands shook as she refolded the letter. "If I refuse, he threatens to have me declared mentally incompetent and force my return." "Can he do that?" Delphine asked, her voice barely a whisper. "He's a liar. He has money and influence." Celestin's voice was hollow. "I have a job cooking and cleaning in a house owned by a man I'm not married to. Which would you believe?" Corbin felt something dangerous unfurl in his chest, a protective fury he'd never experienced before. "There's got to be something we can do." "Actually," Celestin said slowly, "there might be." She looked around the table at all of them, her expression shifting from despair to something that might have been hope. Married women have more legal protection than unmarried ones. If I were someone's wife, Lucien would have a much harder time claiming I'm incompetent or forcing me back to New Orleans. The kitchen fell silent except for the ticking of the mantel clock and the crackling of the fire. "I'd marry you, Corbin," said without hesitation. The words surprised him as much as everyone else. But once they were spoken, he realized they felt more right than anything he'd said in years. "Corbin, you don't understand. I understand plenty." He reached across the table and covered her hands with his own. "I understand that you're the smartest woman I've ever met, that you've helped build something real here, and that I'd be honored to call you my wife." Celestin stared at him. "You'd marry me just to protect me from my brother?" "I'd marry you because I've been half in love with you since you corrected my arithmetic on the cattle accounts," he said honestly. "The protection is just a bonus." Raven cleared her throat. "That's real romantic and all, but what about us?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a doused campfire. Corbin had been so focused on Celestin's immediate problem that he hadn't thought through the implications. "I mean," Raven continued, "if you two get married, where does that leave Delphine and me? Suddenly we're just the hired help living in your house." Delphine's face had gone pale. "We should probably start looking for other arrangements." "No." Corbin's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. "Nobody's going anywhere." He stood up and began pacing the kitchen, his mind racing. "There's got to be a way to make this work for everyone." "Actually," Celestin said slowly, "in some territories, there are precedents for plural marriages." "Absolutely not," the response came from Delphine, surprising everyone. "I won't be part of some arrangement where we're all sharing one man like he's a prize bull." "That's not what I meant," Celestin protested. "Then what did you mean?" Raven demanded. Corbin stopped pacing and looked at the three women who'd become the center of his world. Raven, fierce and loyal, who'd fight a bear to protect the people she loved. Celestin, brilliant and brave, who'd given up wealth and comfort for the freedom to choose her own life. Delphine, gentle and strong, who could make a house feel like heaven, with nothing more than wildflowers and warm bread. He was in love with all of them. The realization should have terrified him. Instead, it felt like coming home. "What if," he said carefully, "we made this a real partnership? All four of us, equal in everything?" Three pairs of eyes stared at him with expressions ranging from confusion to hope to outright skepticism. "I'm listening," Celestin said finally. "Are you absolutely certain this is legal?" Reverend Morrison asked for the third time, adjusting his spectacles as he reviewed the marriage documents Celestin had prepared. Corbin squeezed her hand. "According to territorial law, it's legal. Unusual, but legal." They stood in the small church at sunrise, just the five of them, Corbin, Celestin, Delphine, Raven, and the nervous minister who'd agreed to perform the ceremony. Only after extensive persuasion and a generous donation to the church building fund. The solution they'd worked out was complex but elegant, typical of Celestin's logical mind. Corbin would legally marry Celestin to protect her from her brother's threats. But in their hearts and in their daily lives, all four of them would be bound together as a family unit, partners in every sense that mattered. "The important thing," Celestin had explained while drafting their private agreements, "is that we're all choosing this freely. No one is being coerced or settling for less than they deserve." Raven, resplendent in her one good dress with wildflowers in her red hair, had been characteristically direct. "So long as nobody expects me to start simpering and calling Corbin master, I'm in." Delphine had taken longer to warm to the idea, but when she'd finally nodded her agreement, her smile had been radiant. "It feels right," she'd said simply. "Like we're making something new instead of trying to fit into something that was never meant for us anyway." Now, As Reverend Morrison cleared his throat and began the ceremony, Corbin marveled at how his life had changed in just 6 months. He'd bought a house for $1 and somehow found everything he'd never known he was searching for. Do you, Corbin Ashfield, take Celestine Moreau to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. The words came easily, but he made eye contact with all 3 women as he spoke them. And do you, Celestine Moreau, take Corbin Ashfield to be your lawfully wedded husband? I do. Celestine's voice was steady, her dark eyes shining with joy and determination. After the ceremony, they walked home together through the early morning light. The house looked different somehow, not just the place where they lived and worked, but truly their home. So what happens now? Raven asked as they reached the front porch. Now we build the life we want, Corbin said. Together. The first test of their new arrangement came 2 weeks later when Celestine's brother arrived, unannounced, with a sheriff's deputy and a court order demanding her return to New Orleans. Lucien Moreau was everything Corbin had expected, well-dressed, arrogant, and utterly convinced of his own righteousness. He strode into their kitchen as if he owned it, barely glancing at Raven and Delphine before focusing on his sister. Celestine, this nonsense has gone on long enough. Pack your things. We're leaving today. I don't think so. Celestine stood behind the kitchen table, her wedding ring catching the morning light. I'm married now, Lucien. My husband and I have built a life here. Lucien's gaze shifted to Corbin with obvious disdain. This ... rancher? Celestine, you were raised for better things than this rustic existence. I was raised to be an ornament, she replied calmly. I chose to be a partner instead. The sheriff's deputy, clearly uncomfortable with the family drama, cleared his throat. Ma'am, if you're married and living here of your own free will, there's not much I can do to force you back to Louisiana. She's obviously not thinking clearly, Lucien snapped. Look at this place. Look at these people. My sister has been living in sin with multiple individuals. Careful. Corbin's voice carried a warning that made the deputy's hand drift toward his sidearm. You're talking about my wife and our household staff. Staff? Lucien's laugh was ugly. Is that what you call this arrangement? Raven stepped forward, her green eyes blazing. Mister, I don't know what passes for manners in New Orleans, but around here, we don't insult people in their own home. This isn't your home. It's every bit our home, Delphine said quietly, surprising everyone with her firmness. We've worked for it, cared for it, and earned our place here. Something you wouldn't understand. The confrontation might have escalated. But Celestine moved to stand beside her husband, her chin raised in defiance. Lucien, I'm not the frightened girl who ran away 3 years ago. I'm a married woman with responsibilities and people who depend on me. I'm not going anywhere. After an hour of threats and legal posturing, Lucien Moreau finally accepted defeat and left with promises to challenge the marriage in court. But as his carriage disappeared down the valley road, everyone knew the real victory had already been won. That night, as they sat around the kitchen table sharing supper and stories, Corbin looked at his unconventional family and felt a peace he'd never imagined possible. They'd found something rare, a love that made room for everyone. Winter brought challenges that tested their new family in ways none of them had anticipated. The cattle needed constant care in the bitter cold, the house required more firewood than one man could split, and being confined together during blizzards revealed personality quirks that had been easier to overlook during the busy harvest season. If you leave your muddy boots by the door one more time, I'm going to use them for target practice, Raven announced, glaring at Corbin over her morning coffee. And if you keep using all the hot water for your Saturday baths, I'm going to start charging you rent for the washroom, he shot back. From across the kitchen, Celestine sighed without looking up from her correspondence. We've been over this. We need a schedule for baths, laundry, and boot cleaning. I'll make a chart. We don't need a chart for everything, Delphine said mildly, stirring the oatmeal. We just need to be more considerate of each other. Easy for you to say, Raven muttered. You're considerate to a fault. The rest of us are still learning. It was true. Delphine seemed incapable of selfishness, always putting others' needs before her own. But Corbin had begun to worry that her selflessness came from something deeper than natural kindness, a belief that she somehow deserved less than the others. The realization hit him fully one evening in February when he found her sitting alone in the parlor, mending his shirts by lamplight while everyone else slept. Delphine, it's nearly midnight. You should be resting. She looked up with startled blue eyes. Oh, I wanted to finish these before tomorrow. You're down to your last clean shirt. Corbin sat down beside her on the small sofa, noting the dark circles under her eyes. The shirts can wait. You're more important than clean clothes. Am I? The question was so quiet he almost missed it. What do you mean? Delphine set down her sewing and stared at her hands. Sometimes I wonder if I really belong here, or if I'm just convenient. Raven is brave and strong, and she makes you laugh. Celestine is brilliant and elegant, and she challenges your mind. But me, I just cook and clean and try not to get in anyone's way. Corbin felt his heart break a little. Delphine, look at me. When she raised her eyes to his, he saw years of hurt she'd never shared with anyone. You're not convenient, he said firmly. You're essential. This house isn't a home because it's clean. It's a home because you fill it with love. Every meal you cook, every flower you put on the table, every time you hum while you work, you make all of us better people. Just by being here. Tears gathered in her eyes. But I'm not special like they are. You're wrong. He reached out and took her hands, noting the small calluses from all her careful work. You want to know what's special about you? You have the biggest heart of anyone I've ever met. You see the best in people and you make them want to live. Up to it. You've never asked for anything for yourself, but you give everything to everyone else. Korb, I'm not finished. He moved closer until he could see the golden flecks in her blue eyes. I was half dead when I bought this house. Oh, I was breathing and walking around, but I wasn't really living. You changed that. All three of you did, but you taught me what it felt like to be cared for, to matter to someone. Before he could lose his nerve, he leaned forward and kissed her soft and gentle like she was. When they broke apart, her cheeks were flushed and her eyes were bright. I love you, Delphine Hartwell. Not because you take care of me, but because of who you are. Because you make wildflower bouquets and hum lullabies and believe that everyone deserves kindness even when they haven't earned it. I love you too, she whispered. I have for months, but I didn't think. Didn't think what? That I could compete with the others. Corbin cupped her face in his hands. This isn't a competition. Love isn't something you have to earn or win. It just is. They talked until dawn, sharing fears and dreams and all the small hurts they'd been carrying alone. By the time the sun rose over the mountains, something had shifted between them, a barrier dissolved, a connection deepened. When Raven and Celestine found them asleep on the sofa the next morning, still holding hands, they just smiled and quietly started breakfast. About time, Raven murmured to Celestine. That girl's been pining something fierce. They all have, Celestine replied, watching the peaceful expression on Corbin's face. Perhaps now we can stop pretending we're just business partners and start being what we really are, which is, Celestine smiled, a family bound by choice instead of blood. The best kind there is. Spring arrived early that year, bringing with it a letter that would test everything they'd built together. Corbin found it tucked between the usual bills and catalogs expensive paper with a New York return address and his name written in unfamiliar handwriting. Dear Mr. Ashfield, He read aloud to the women gathered around the breakfast table. I represent the estate of your late uncle, Jeremiah Ashfield of Manhattan. Upon his death last month, you were named as his sole heir. Please contact our offices at your earliest convenience to discuss the inheritance, which includes substantial property holdings and investments valued at approximately $200,000. The silence that followed was deafening. $200,000? Raven whispered. That's more money than most people see in a lifetime. Corbin stared at the letter, trying to process what it meant. He'd never met his uncle Jeremiah, had barely known the man existed. But now, apparently, he was wealthy beyond his wildest dreams. Congratulations, Celestin said quietly, though her voice lacked its usual warmth. You'll be able to buy any ranch you want now, build something grand. We have a ranch, he said automatically. We have everything we need right here. But even as he spoke the words, he could see the doubt creeping into their eyes. $200,000 was freedom, the freedom to go anywhere, be anyone, marry any woman he chose. Why would he stay in a remote valley with 3 women who'd started as his business partners? The question hung unspoken in the air between them for days. Corbin sent a telegram to the New York lawyers, requesting more information about the inheritance, but his heart wasn't in it. Every time he looked at his wife and partners, he saw them pulling away from him, protecting themselves from the inevitable moment when he'd choose money over love. It was Delphine who finally broke the tension. She'd been quieter than usual, going through the motions of cooking and cleaning but without her characteristic joy. On a warm evening in April, she found Corbin on the front porch, staring out at the cattle grazing in their valley. You should go, she said simply. What? To New York. You should claim your inheritance and build the life you deserve. Corbin turned to face her, noting the tears she was trying to hide. And what about the life I have here? We'll be fine. We always land on our feet. Her smile was brave and utterly heartbreaking. Besides, maybe it's time for all of us to move on. Raven's been talking about opening a restaurant in town, and Celestin could teach school anywhere. And I'll find something. Delphine? He stood up and pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. Do you really think I'd give up the 3 best things that ever happened to me for money? It's not just money. It's opportunity. Respectability. You could marry a proper lady and have the kind of family that doesn't make people whisper behind their hands. I don't want a proper lady. I want you. All of you. He tilted her chin up so she had to meet his eyes. Do you want to know what I've decided about the inheritance? She nodded, not trusting her voice. I'm going to accept it. But not for the reasons you think. He pulled the lawyer's most recent telegram from his pocket. The main asset is a textile mill in Pennsylvania. It's struggling because the owner, my uncle, was more interested in profit than in treating his workers fairly. What does that have to do with us? Everything. We're going to turn it around, make it a place where people earn fair wages for honest work. Use the profits to buy more land here, expand the ranch, maybe build a proper school for the valley children. His smile grew wider as he spoke. We're going to use Jeremiah Ashfield's money to build the kind of life he probably never imagined. Delphine stared at him. We? Did you think I'd do any of this without my partners? Raven can manage the business side. Nobody's better at spotting a bad deal or negotiating fair terms. Celestin can handle the finances and legal aspects. And you? He kissed her forehead. You'll make sure we never lose sight of why we're doing this. You'll keep us human. But the mill is in Pennsylvania. We'd have to leave the ranch. 4. Part of each year, maybe. Or we could hire good managers and visit periodically. The point is, we decide together, as a family. That night, he made the same speech to Raven and Celestin. Their reactions were everything he'd hoped for: excitement. ideas tumbling over each other as they planned how to transform his uncle's legacy into something meaningful. "So you're really staying?" Raven asked as they worked out the details around the kitchen table. "Even with enough money to buy half the territory?" Corbin looked around the table at the three women who'd changed his life. Celestin, brilliant and brave, already sketching plans for worker housing and profit-sharing programs. Raven, fierce and loyal, calculating how much they could improve wages without bankrupting the operation. Delphine, gentle and wise, quietly suggesting ways to make the mill workers' lives better in small but meaningful ways. "I'm staying," he said firmly. "This is where I belong." A year later, Corbin stood in the same kitchen where he'd first met them, watching his unconventional family prepare for their latest adventure. The mill in Pennsylvania was thriving under their management. The ranch had expanded to include 3 neighboring properties, and the house had been enlarged to accommodate the children who were already part of their plans. "Are you ready for this?" Celestin asked, adjusting her traveling hat as she reviewed their itinerary. "More than ready," Corbin replied, thinking of how far they'd all come from that first morning when a skillet had narrowly missed his head. He'd bought a house for $1 and discovered 3 women in the kitchen. But what he'd really found was proof that the best families aren't always the ones you're born into. Sometimes they're the ones you choose, one decision at a time, until love becomes as natural as breathing. As they loaded their bags into the wagon for the trip to the train station, Corbin took one last look at the house that had started it all. When they returned from Pennsylvania in the fall, there would be new challenges, new dreams to pursue, new adventures to share. But whatever came next, they would face it together, 4 hearts bound by something stronger than law or convention, or even blood. They'd found their home in each other, and that was worth more than all the money in the world.